you very much, Stephen. So, hello, everybody. My name is Stefan David Safar. I'm scientific coordinator of the Science and Diplomacy Lab, the SEED Lab at the University of Geneva. And welcome to this session on computational diplomacy. So as you see, we're going to talk about a specific term, a specific space. Today that is computational diplomacy. And in order to get started, this is a session that is co-hosted by the SEED Lab, the Science and Diplomacy Lab, and JESDA, the Geneva Foundation for the Science and Anticipation. No, because you know what? We're Friday, and I think all of you this week has been about about a lot of acronyms and names and institutions. So we promise we're going to try to keep this session as low acronym intensity as possible. So now I'm just going to pass the floor to Maricela Munoz, who's from the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, JESDA, the foundation, and she's JESDA is the co-governor of this session.
Thank you so much, Stefan. So I just wanted to say that I'm really honored to be here. I know that you have had a very intense week. As Stefan was mentioning, I am with the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, which is a Swiss government foundation, but also supported by philanthropic efforts. So it's actually a public-private partnership. I am the director of strategic partnerships, but also a diplomat. So I bring in that diplomacy background into what we do. And I hope that you have an enjoyable discussion with us, because this is really intended to be very interactive. So welcome again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now, you know, before I introduce you the speakers, I'm promising I'm not stalling, because we still have one speaker who's on the bus and is about to arrive from Zurich. Let me just introduce you the session before we move to our distinguished panelists. So you came in this room for a session entitled Computational Diplomacy. So of course you hope you'll get out of this room knowing more about what is computational diplomacy and how it relates to AI, which is basically the main reason why you're all here this week. So the way we want you to get into that session is to understand computational diplomacy as a space that we are trying to carve really in the SEED Lab. That is the Science and Diplomacy Lab. That is a joint venture between the University in Geneva and the Polytechnical School in Zurich, so ETH Zurich. This cooperation has been set up 2 years ago now, and so we're creating this institution where we have now 2 professors in Geneva. There is a process of recruiting one in Zurich right now, and the ultimate objective of the SEED Lab is to, as I said before, to carve out that space of computational diplomacy. Because when you hear about computational diplomacy, the idea that we want really to kind of interrogate and go beyond is we're not here to talk about how to build tools using technologies such as AI or any kind of other data-driven approaches or tools for diplomats or for diplomacy. It's much more than that. This is, of course, part of the discussion, but we're also talking and mainly about having social scientists and computer scientists basically talk together, because we've been having this discussion for a very long time, but in practice, we still need the right space, the right discussions to have all this community, all these people working together. So computational diplomacy for the moment, without acronyms or anything, is mainly about carving up that space that is about creating a discussion among several actors and stakeholders of this bigger discussion of computational diplomacy. So we're having different roles here represented, different kind of actors that are representative of the space we're carving out at the Seed Lab in strong cooperation with JESDA. So our distinguished speakers that we have, distinguished panelists, I'm just going to give their names, but we want them to introduce, they will introduce themselves one after the other. So maybe a quick, we'll start with Maricela Munoz, as you didn't have time to properly introduce yourself before, if you just can take.
Thank you so much. So as I said, I am a diplomat, specifically from Costa Rica, so from a developing economy, and I think this is important to note. And I have experience in international negotiations and multilateralism mostly, and I am fascinated by this subject of creating bridges between science and diplomacy and policymaking for obvious reasons, because at the pace of rapid technological developments, there is no other way to go but to work together collaboratively. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And now talking about bridge, we have, I think, a very experienced person in terms of bridge making. We have Ambassador Andrei Zvereb, who's the ambassador for digital diplomacy from Malta. So thank you very much also for joining us remotely from Malta. Andrei, the floor is yours. You can just quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much, and it's a sincere pleasure to be here and an honor. And I wish I could be there. I mean, I've been to that place for quite a few times now, and I like Geneva. I like Campus Biotech. So it would have been nice to be there. Maybe next year. So I'm Andrei Zvereb. I am on the one hand, I'm a quantum physicist. So I come from a very hardcore line of the sciences, so to speak. But I also have this diplomatic role as the ambassador for digital affairs, and I really enjoyed hearing the previous speaker kind of introduce herself as someone with interest in both sides, which I also share. But from the point of view, perhaps of Costa Rica, which has I'd say a specific role to play in the world, we also, Malta, have a very particular role to play. We are an advanced economy in the economic sense of the word, but we are tiny, absolutely tiny. And that brings with it some really interesting challenges, particularly with AI, particularly with tech companies and so on. So it's a very, very interesting field to operate in, but one which requires lots of bridges, not just diplomatic bridges, but as we're saying here, bridges between science and diplomacy. And this is absolutely fascinating to me. So thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for being here, ambassadors. So now, we'll move back to the pretty scientific community. And I'm sorry if I'm going to put you in boxes here, but to have a good discussion, start first by identifying these boxes. But Andrei, you're already outside of one of the boxes, so it's making my job more complicated. So now we have Dr. Philippe Widmer from ETH Zurich.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. So you put people in boxes. I'm in the research box. I'm at the social sciences department of ETH Zurich, and I'm working at the intersection of political science, economics, and data science. And I'm particularly interested in the media, so both traditional and social media, and how the media interact with new technologies such as like algorithms are used for content recommendation, and how these the media, these new technologies, and institutions, so political and economic institutions interact.
Then we have Professor Roland Bouffanet from the University of Geneva.
Good morning. So my name is Roland Bouffanet. So I'm part of the Seed Lab at the University of Geneva. I'm a professor in computer science, and at the same time, I have an affiliation with the Global Studies Institute in Geneva, at the University of Geneva. My work is in using AI to study complex systems, and in particular, to look at the dynamics of complex systems and network systems with the social component. And I don't want to be put into a box at all, because the whole point, the whole reason why I'm here is to work on interdisciplinary topics across the departments, the boundaries, and with all of you. Yeah, thank you.
Professor Verli.
Good morning. My name is Didier Vernley. I'm an associate professor at the University of Geneva, based at the Global Studies Institute and the Department of Computer Science of the Faculty of Science. I work with Roland and Jean-Luc mainly at the Seed Lab. My background is initially from medicine. So I'm very interested in the global governance of infectious disease or global health governance. And now we try to apply data science and computational modeling approaches. So this is a good collaboration between the group to move this topic forward.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Jean-Luc Falcone.
So hello, my name is Jean-Luc Falcone. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Computer Science of the University of Geneva. I'm also part of Seed Lab. And my main research interests are multi-scale and multi-science models, high-performance computing, and the exploration of large data sets through AI or more classic methods.
Thank you very much. Correct? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now that we introduced our speakers, thank you again for all of you for being here in person and remotely. So this session is going to work as a dialogue among our speakers. So don't worry, there won't be 5-6 presentations. There's going to be a set of questions, and each of our panelists will address them. And of course, in the meantime, if you want to ask questions, or of course, people also online, will try to moderate them as well and to address them and to integrate them in this in the process of this session. So let's get started. So to know better and to present what's computational diplomacy, what does it do, what does it aim to achieve. So we'll start with the first question, since we're talking about artificial intelligence in this conference. We'll start with a very basic question to all of you, which is as simply as put as, how do you already use AI? What do you do with it? How is it part of your professional competence, from which box you're coming from? So we'll get started with Didier Vernley.
Thank you, Stefan. So the goal of the Seed Lab, one of the goals of the Seed Lab, is to be able to study the international system from a data science point of view. And if we take, for example, the United Nations, typical of multilateral diplomacy, there is a lot of documents that are produced each year, and different types of documents, which can be treaties, which can be resolution, which can be technical document report. These documents, they contain usually relevant information about different multilateral processes, about a number of entities, and of course, having this material in a way that is exploitable is key for us. So, of course, because the UN system started just after World War II, a number of these documents are just image scan, and we cannot do anything from them. So the first thing that we need to do, of course, is optical character recognition, and this is a technique now that works pretty well. A huge number of documents have been processed like this. But this is insufficient for us. If I take, for example, the data set of the United Nations General Assembly resolution, approximately 80,000 resolution. They can be on the same pages, they can have footnotes, they can have annexes. And if you need to process that manually, it's going to take age, of course. What we try to do now is to use segmentation model and train them to recognize the type of content. So we can automatize the process of converting this document into data and usable material. So I think this is for us a very, it's a priority, because a lot of there is a lot of information and insights that can be taken from this resolution, especially when you consider a whole body. Because research usually focuses on some resolution in one topic, but you can now look at the whole body of the production of this document and see how they are organized.
Thank you very much. Now, Jean-Luc.
So currently, I'm mostly using AI in order to analyze the corpus of diplomatic production, so texts, votes, ideally attendance, in order to try to find common recurring patterns, in order to try to find all the important stuff that is really difficult to come with just by reading or analyzing the data, either manually or with traditional approaches. So my initial training was in bioinformatics, and I think the fact that this building is called Campus Biotech is the part of a movement and a tradition that emerged in the 90s and the 2000s that was based on using machine learning and data algorithms in order to exploit all the incredible biological data coming from sequencing progress. And in some way, that's what we are trying to do, is to follow the same kind of approaches, but this time with diplomatic data.
Thank you very much. Philin?
Yeah, I think our world is somewhat similar. So personally, I'm using especially natural language processing for like discourse analysis. So I guess that's fairly similar. For example, I have a recent project where I study how the spread of the internet and the fact that it's very hard for any country to be an informational island in that context, how this changes censorship strategies. So this would be one example. I think in many ways, science and so also social science mirrors a bit society. And I think our lives are very pervaded by computational methods. And I think we see this also in the social sciences. If you look at the publications in the top journals, recent publications, many of them, they use some aspect of data science somewhere in the production process of the research. And I think this can take very different shapes. So I think there is the scenario where we want to study a long-standing question, like, for example, on agenda setting, but now we can do it in new ways because we have the data now to analyze these things. We have the methods, and we also have the compute. I think there are other research questions where we can generate new data. We can build variables, new variables, for example, from text, from images, from audio data, just from any kinds of data treasures that we couldn't access before. And yeah, and I think finally also we have a lot of questions that are questions that we need to study now because we have these computational methods, because they're used in the private sector, they're used out there in the world beyond academia. So I think this also gives rise to important questions like how does actually the very existence of these social of these computational social science methods change political outcomes, for example.
Thank you very much, Roland.
Thank you. So I think it's fair to say that diplomacy has evolved a lot. You know, the diplomats used to be the main actors, and now if you look at you know, mega challenges like climate diplomacy, for instance, you have many more actors involved. You have NGOs, you have the public, and one of the things that we are looking into is using AI to better understand collective decision-making in those groups. It's like a kind of social network, if you want, of diplomats, of various actors. And as we know from the past COPs, you know, trying to reach consensus is very challenging. So there are ways we use AI as a way to improve collective decision-making, better understand how we can foster consensus, for instance. And specifically, the topic of consensus in the science of systems has, you know, has been dealt with using a range of AI technologies, including multi-agent reinforcement learning. So I'll say more about this later.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maricela.
Thank you so much. So I think that I can respond to this question from the practitioner point of view. I remember when we were hit by the pandemic, and I was working here at the Palais des Nations, posted here in Geneva. And overnight, we had to become very creative and start looking for a tool that will allow us to continue the conversations, the negotiations, the processes, the diplomatic processes. And so at that time, of course, we started with platforms that would allow us in a secure way, more or less, to continue interacting. But we also started looking at AI as a really powerful tool, as my colleagues were saying, to look at the past, what has been agreed. You may have heard diplomats always looking for the agreed language so that they can come up with common understandings, but also looking forward, which is more important in the governance of global goods, to look for ways in which we can collaborate, and having the computational models and sometimes also the predictions models to anticipate how the negotiation could go is very useful. But I would also add that for us, AI is not only a tool that can be used, but also is a subject matter that has acquired greater relevance, particularly lately. You have seen that the UN Security Council has been holding a couple of sessions on the AI governance issue. And there is a new scientific advisory board being launched by the Secretary General. And each one of us in our different capacities and for the different delegations, no matter how resourceful they may be, they need to get in touch with the convergence of technology for the negotiations. If you talk about lethal autonomous weapon systems, you need to understand a little bit about artificial intelligence. Same goes for biotechnology, neurotechnology. So there are many angles in which diplomats are exposed to artificial intelligence, but of course, also as a potential tool.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move. We didn't forget you, Andre. So because you're not there, but I promise you, you'll go. As of what you'll go first when we're the order. So the floor is yours now, Andre.
Thank you so much. And don't worry. I was taking down notes and revising what I needed to say. So thank you for leaving me for last. So what is interesting hearing my fellow speakers is that there's this kind of sense throughout that AI is improving or can be used to improve diplomacy, AI in diplomacy or AI as a tool. And in this sense, asking us how we use AI is an impossible question to answer. In some sense, AI is in the predictive typing feature of my phone. It's everywhere. It's asking us how we use our phones or our computers. It is gone everywhere at the moment. But I'd like to kind of bring a different, kind of more diplomatic flavor perhaps to this. And instead of talking about AI in diplomacy, let's talk a bit about AI for diplomacy or diplomacy for AI, kind of a mixture of these two, which I hope is an interesting aspect of the discussion. So in some sense, AI is also one more means countries like ours have to conduct diplomacy. So what do I mean by that? I don't mean using AI as a tool for facilitating international relationships. We've already kind of heard about this, and it's a very, very important tool, but there are other aspects as well. So, like many other emerging technologies, quantum computing being another one, for example, there is an inequity in the world. Not every country has access to the same resources, the same human capacity, the same computational capacity as every other country. And this provides an opportunity for doing diplomacy in the following way. So nations like Switzerland and Malta, I mean, both are nations which have a lot of human capacity, computational resources and human capacity, can engage in what can be called technological diplomacy and help to promote more equitable access to these technologies like AI, quantum computing, and so on throughout the world. So it allows us a new way of doing diplomacy. Even if we're tiny, we have the right resources in AI to be able to reach out to countries that don't yet have those resources and foster that relationship between these two countries through the medium of new technologies like AI. And this the location where this is being held is particularly appropriate, because one of these initiatives we're involved in, not AI for a second, is in quantum computing and is led by JESDA itself. It's called the Open Quantum Institute. So Malta's involved in this, but we're also involved in another one, which is for AI, and this is through the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth itself has recognized that there is a divide between nations, and that we should bring everyone around the same table, and those nations like ours that have more capacity, together with the private sector, we engage diplomatically with other nations to bring these technologies to them. So all this to say, AI is a fantastic new tool that allows us to improve our diplomatic processes. We could also look at it from the other perspective, which is AI also provides us with a new means to conduct diplomacy. For those of us who have little hard power, it's a very good tool for soft power as well.
So thank you very much, Andre. So with this first answers we had from our speakers, we can see that AI, of course, bears a lot of promises in the diplomatic circles, also in the study of international relations, in the study of global governance. The promises are there. We talked about it. And of course, when we talk about promises, this has been the nice way to start about it. Of course, there are a lot of challenges, and we are here to discuss about them and to ask our speakers about it. But in order to have a more fruitful conversation, since there are going to be a lot of challenges and issues to discuss, we're going to start about asking from our panelists who are more in, again, boxes, sorry, an academic perspective, to start mentioning the scientific challenges. And then, because, we very often have this discussion, we end up mixing up, scientific challenges, legal challenges, societal challenges. Let's start with, since we have a lot of AI specialists here, with the scientific challenges in your use of AI beyond the promises that you all mentioned. So let's get started with Philin.
Yes, so I would like to bring forward an analogy. So with the spread of the internet, there was this debate. There were enthusiasts who said, this is going to democratize everything. This is going to foster grassroots movements. This is wonderful. This is going to be a huge equalizing force for the better. And there were skeptics that said, no, actually, this will just give big players more covered ways of taking their influence. It will lead to huge concentration of power. And I think we haven't settled this debate yet, and we probably never will, because there are so many ways how the internet affects us. But I would like to make this analogy to explain how these new technologies are for science, at least from my perspective. So in some ways, it's like a dream come true. We have access to data that are so big that we can barely imagine the numbers of texts and images that we have at our fingertips, how cheap the compute has become, how sophisticated analysis we can run just on our laptops in a train, basically. And we can connect with researchers from all over the world just like this. So all of this is great. But in some ways, I think we're also excluded as scientists. And I can give you an example from my field of research. I mentioned social media. So if you think about the big players in this realm, it's clearly the technology companies, and they have vast amounts of data, and they have, if their technologies are available to us, it's only in a slightly kind of black box-ish way. So this puts us in the situation where a lot of questions that we should study, because there are important questions from an economic or political viewpoint, we can't actually study them in a way that we would like to, because we just don't have access to this data. And I think this has also given rise a bit to this kind of hegemony, I would say, of big companies, also in research. Researchers, they have to collaborate with the big platforms to get access to this data. And it doesn't necessarily have to compromise the research quality, but I think we can all see how this could change incentives consciously or unconsciously in some ways. So I would say a lot of opportunity, but this is clearly a challenge. I think another challenge that we have from a scientific viewpoint is the speed of development. In natural language processing, there are hundreds or thousands of papers coming out like every little bit. And how do we know which ones are the relevant? Or if we are studying these methods as like a research subject, by the time we have answered some questions on the societal implications of these methods, the methods has already changed, let alone these papers being published, because there's like a huge lag. So, and then we're like, okay, we did this research on like a past version of that technology. Do the results still hold? I think it's a very, very fast moving world, and it doesn't always make it easy to have the answers that we would need in time while maintaining this like scientific rigor. And I think in this respect, also education is very important, so that we have, so that scientists can also anticipate a bit what could be like the most relevant technologies. But then again, predictions are always hard, especially about the future.
Thank you very much. Roland?
Well, I will echo some of the points by Feline here, and saying that data is here. I mean, some of the biases that you have when people study social networks, where all the data is with the big companies and they have the tools, this is also a challenge for us. We need access to the data. We also need to have access to the specific tools. Another important element is for us as scientists, you mentioned scientific challenges. I think a major scientific challenge is also a discussion with the diplomatic community. We cannot be a scientist just, being, in our ivory towers, working on methods and AI purely with data. So it's fantastic that today we have the ambassador from Malta being here with us, another colleague from JESA as well. So we need to have a stronger, to have more bridges with the entire community. And I mentioned earlier that if you study, multilateral discussions, diplomatic settings, you have many, many actors that are involved. So we are the scientists. We need to bring the rigor. We need to bring the right tools. We need access to the data, and at the same time, we also need to have this effort to go towards the community and for the better good of the whole planet.
Thank you very much, Roland. Jean-Luc?
From a scientific point of view, in my opinion, I see two kinds of challenges that we are trying to solve now. The first one is quite technical, at least it appears technical, is the fact that with a large corpus of data, there are roughly two kinds of ways of approaching it. Either you can try to find the most common pattern. You have an idea of the average of the main mechanism. And I would say it's a bit of a physicist way of doing, of analyzing experience. So you have lots of experience with noise and you try to find a common characteristic in order to infer a law. That's one approach, and it's really important. The other one is more of a biologist approach, is you try to see what happened when it doesn't work. So you focus on defects. And you try from this defect to understand the underlying process. And these two approaches are really complementary, but it's quite difficult to find tools that are able to perform both. For example, usually the lots of AI model, they will try to infer a common, a most probable model from the data. But sometimes we need the opposite. We need something which is able to find small differences and then try to see what impact they have. But that's one of the challenge that I experienced. The other one is the perhaps continuing to adding to what Roland say, is how to frame the questions. How to be sure that we are able to frame the question in a way that we can exchange, we can provide meaningful and relevant answer to challenges that are experienced in the diplomatic community or in the general public, for example. And for us, it's a problem because with AI, it's really easy to take a lot of data and produce a new lot of data. But the fact here that we lack in our discussion sometimes is the translating, understanding some question, some issue, and then trying to provide answer with tailored tools, tailored algorithms in order to answer them as best as possible.
Thank you very much, Didier.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on the big challenge of processing millions of documents that relate to international relations. And we have, as I mentioned before, we have started to do some work on resolutions adopted by international organizations. And there is a need also for, at the technical level, to have the right tool. So there is a lot of experience in the digital humanities to transcribe old and ancient texts. It can be manuscript. Some platforms are now private, others are public. We have used a tool that is called eScriptorium, that has the capacity to recognize and segment text from very different sources, and then we try to train the model to improve the accuracy in recognition. And in addition to those tools, more tailored for historical documents, you have now companies that provide services to automatically extract information from text, from images. There are many startups trying to vie for the market there. And we are a bit in the middle, and what we realized so far in terms of challenges is that, of course, we need to take some time to have a sufficient training material, because the results that we got with the classical model were not so good at the beginning. But newer model segmentation like YOLO, for example, they are providing us with very promising results. So we are in the phase of refining and retraining the model so that we can extract this information and automatize as much as possible the conversion of text to data. Then that we can analyze using different techniques, like it has been mentioned, computational text analysis. What we do a lot also is network analysis of text. How different diplomatic texts cite each other. A bit like scientific paper, they cite each other. And then you can have a map, kind of normative map of different topics. So this is for currently, I would say, the main scientific or technical challenge in what I do.
Thank you very much, Didier. So do we have a question in the audience or online specifically on the issue of scientific challenges? So please don't hesitate to ask a question. Yes, please.
If I may make a comment, kind of on a meta-scientific challenge, so to speak. Also, maybe to bring the two boxes of the discussion together again. From my perspective, what I'm hearing again from the diplomatic side and from the scientific side is a mismatch in timescales. There is this urgent need to apply artificial intelligence to solving real-world problems now. But the scientists know that AI is not a solved problem yet. Just to mention, the idea of using AI to look into, for example, historical United Nations documents is fantastic. But if we start opening up that catchment area, we face the challenge of curating the input data, which is, the bias problem. And when you're talking about, trawling the entire internet, how do you correct for that bias? And as an academic, it doesn't really matter. You just reflect the bias and say, this is what we see. But if you're starting to use that to make decisions, and this is the mismatch between the two kind of different halves, when you start using that model to make decisions, that's where the problems lie. So from my perspective, the scientific challenge of bias is a big one. And this is kind of combined with, as has been said, or hinted at before as well here, the idea that most AI models, at least the ones I'm familiar with, are black boxes. We don't know easily why they recommend certain courses of actions. There are people working towards what they're calling explainable AI. And I think that's a necessary first step before we start applying these models to solve large-scale issues. Otherwise, we're going to start having problems even between countries, international relationships, international relations rather. So this kind of, from my perspective, seeing both sides, there is this mismatch. And I think we should be cognizant of the fact that AI is not yet a solved problem in every sense. And we can't use the current state to start blindly applying it to solve problems or, blindly do things for us. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Maricela, you wanted to add something to this comment?
I just wanted to chip in. I don't want to place myself in a box either, but as a practitioner and then from the standpoint of view of JESTA, I think that I find a lot of convergence with what has been said. One of the main issues that we have seen is the need to enhance human agency and education, as you were saying, to be able to deal with these technologies and to differentiate between the hype and the truth. And I think that for this reason, working collaboratively with scientists and academics is very important, because you can provide us with the evidence-based information and the data to make this differentiation. But we also need to work better together in the current geopolitical climate to address, for instance, the deterioration of democracy and the increased fragmentation, polarization that is sometimes fueled by misinformation and disinformation. And of course, AI is behind a lot of this use of the tools, these not so good applications, let's say. But it's a two-way street. And I think that we can also provide scientists as policymakers and diplomats with the right indication of where the needs are, so that the research is aligned to this reality, and also to work better in creating different type of incentives, because I think that currently there is a problem with the incentives for research. Sometimes they are allocated not in a so very inclusive way, or not necessarily tackling the problems and the challenges that it should be tackling. And of course, we both need to find ways and solutions to do this better together. From the standpoint of view of JESTA, we are at Think and Do Tank. So we have initiatives, but we also have developed a tool that is called the Science Breakthrough Radar, which is online, but it's also an annual compendium of the latest scientific breakthroughs in 5 platforms: advanced AI, quantum computing, neuroaugmentation, etc. And we're creating a tool ourselves, a sort of ChatGPT, if you will, to be able to interact better with the diplomats and the decision makers, so that they can ask the right questions as well and get then the evidence-based information. And when we talk with colleagues here, for instance, in Geneva, but elsewhere in the capitals and in New York, they tell us we really need trustworthy sources. So I really see a role for science diplomats and diplomatic scientists to work together, so that we all can rest assured that the information that we're receiving is trustworthy and evidence-based.
Thank you very much. We had a question at the back. Yes, please.
I live mine of the One Goal Initiative for Governance. This is to the speaker who is to our right. I don't know your name. I haven't paid attention to it. I would like to collaborate with you because we've been developing a method for the consolidation of 2 different things. It can be, 2 different laws, 2 different projects, etc. And in relation to this mapping of the relationships between the documents that you're doing, it would be interesting to actually merge the meaning, what the end document ends up meaning by referencing to those other documents. Let's work on this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Didier, do you want to answer?
Of course, I'm very interested in learning more what you are doing, and I think there is a lot of potential in doing this kind of analysis. So, thank you.
Great. So, sounds like there's going to be a discussion and a coffee after this session on these issues. Thank you very much for your question. and happy to see that this kind of conferences, they can also trigger this kind of cooperations. Yes, another question here.
Thank you very much for the presentations. And I want to take what Andre said about biases on the processing of text. So from a technical perspective, which algorithms or techniques are you using to avoid or identify biases that, I don't know, I think, for example, the URSS may be on many documents and they don't longer exist. There are new countries that are not on documents on the UN, so they obviously will be biased on what you can conclude from that. So which approach you take for principally natural language processing on these documents?
I can answer in two different ways. The first one is that, of course, if we need a language model and we use large language model, we need to be sure that they are accurate and tuned for the kind of language that we are looking in our text. For example, for diplomatic text of the 50s, it's perhaps not worth using, I don't know, a sentiment analysis trained on Twitter to analyze it, because there will be a huge bias. So that's something. But what is really interesting is that we are trying to have a widest possible corpus and then working on it. That's one point. But the second one is how we will analyze how we are currently analyzing the information. And the fact is that we don't use directly the NLP result. We use the NLP result in order to build knowledge, and then we analyze this knowledge. And when you start building a knowledge graph, it's quite easy to say that Russia is a successor state of your URSS, for example. And so that's Russia belongs to a community of nations that were part of it. And then you can analyze this community graph and this knowledge graph and try to use this external sources in order to complement it and try to have the better view. And the third thing I can say is that we are trying to use different methods from completely different approaches and comparing the results to see if it fits the same region or not.
Thank you. You wanted to add something, or?
I think actually, and we also had this comment before that maybe in research you can just use things. But my experience, for example, with referees, which is kind of the people who are very, very important for you as a researcher in the end, these questions, they are asked. So I think in some ways, politicians and scientists are a bit similar in the sense that they kind of, big technologies, they're deployed and we are kind of behind these deployments with our dustpans and brooms, kind of trying to clean up the societal implications that are maybe undesirable. And I think what also in research, what we do a lot is human annotations specifically to kind of check whether the annotations that we made, whether they make sense. If a human, according to some kind of scheme that we would give a human worker, annotates a subset of the data, and we would see if this aligns the decisions of the model in this particular case.
Thank you very much. Yes, another question?
So since it was mentioned in the beginning of the panel discussion, the topic of multi-reinforcement learning, I was wondering what are the current challenges and successes, and what's the frontier of using multi-agent reinforcement learning to model diplomacy between AI agents, so letting them communicate and share complex plans by themselves.
So I guess the question is for me, right?
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you have the usual issues with multi-agent reinforcement learning, like non-stationarity. The fact that you have multiple agents learning at the same time and the environment they are embedded is changing because of the presence of other agents. So that's inherent, it's still there. But I would say the biggest hurdle for us in science and diplomacy is mostly about modeling human agents. It's something that is at the interface between working with the social sciences. So how do we model some irrational aspects of diplomatic agents and we can come up with tons of models, and as scientists, we're very good at that. And you can do a lot of incremental research, which I feel is quite irrelevant. So this is where we need data about, the actors and see how we can have a data validated model of agents that we can, for which we can apply techniques for multi-agent reinforcement learning. So I would say that the AI scientists, we are working on our own problems with MARL, and at the same time, I would see the biggest challenge really in terms of modeling human agents.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I add
Yes,
two fingers?
of course.
That's really interesting because sometimes you can have the best information for your negotiations. A whole team has been preparing your talking points and your counter strategies for months, but then you deal with a human being on the other side, and it doesn't matter which flag they are holding. It really is about the person you're interacting with, and that's the human part of the diplomatic practice. So it's very interesting that you pointed this out because, of course, the evidence-based models are an excellent tool, but they need to be, adjusted and considered with these nuances of the human being, human psychology, and different personalities, no matter the political stance of those people. So very interesting indeed.
Thank you. If I just may add just 1 second. So on the one hand, those interactions can be very positive. There are like tons of examples in, diplomacy where two actors from two states that are in conflict, and they manage to overcome the issues between the countries and come up with conflict resolution just because strong social ties or trust between these people. And on the other hand, you also have actors that have erratic behaviors, and they will essentially diminish the consensus that can be reached. And so modeling erratic behaviors, there are ways to do that. On the positive side, it's actually much harder right now to see how, I would say, positive or like reinforcing social ties can benefit reaching consensus. But at the end of the day, any model has to be validated with data.
Thank you very much. Yes.
These interactive applications of AI are quite useful. And I wanted to ask about dialogue systems more generally. A lot of what you've been talking about has been text analysis systems, but ChatGPT and so on can engage in dialogues. And I wonder if you could imagine dialogue applications somehow crowdsource certain elements of diplomacy. For instance, conflict zones, as you're just talking about, you could imagine there being a chat agent that acts as some kind of peacemaker that, for instance, does ordinary peacemakers do in conflict zones, which is to reach out to individuals and try to connect them, show each other their common humanity, and talk about each other's, as people, as individuals. So this is diplomacy in the small, I guess, or maybe it's implementation of the sorts of diplomatic initiatives that actual diplomatics do. So I was wondering if you could comment on that potential application. Is that in scope for this computational diplomacy discussion?
So yes, thank you. I think it is. It is something that we should develop based on all the data that we can collect, the text, to see whether we can train a large generative model, large language model to do these kind of things, and run a number of simulation of negotiation, defining a number of parameters. What is interesting is that we already run simulation with students that simulate the diplomatic processes. But it would be interesting also to do a number of iteration. That was a bit the work of Robert Axelrod a very long time ago. Try to simulate this very simple parameter at that time. But now, with this larger language model, I think there is an opportunity to test these kind of things.
Just on the issue of data, the relevant data may be not to do with diplomatic documents or something, but in this case, in the small, it might be you could use ordinary, pre-trained models and then just augment the queries with, for instance, information from a local newspaper on one side of the conflict, or information, from I don't know, about a person, about individuals, and so the data that you might need might not be to do with diplomacy at all, but to do with people's ordinary lives, because that would be a way of identifying the common humanity between the people in these zones.
Jean-Luc, can I address this?
Yeah. So in my opinion, it may be possible to do something like conflict reduction, but certainly not with a tool like ChatGPT. Certainly not, because you need some kind of basic argumentation that is not just language, but goes a little bit deeper. Because if you want to make some conflict resolution, you will have to find some arguments and to have arguments that are articulated. And that's something that GPT is quite bad at it. So that's, I don't think it's the way. Perhaps something that was suggested by some diplomats, but is more related to text this time, is to try to find some neutral but efficient phrasing of problems or solution that are more easy to sell and to agree on. So that's something that was suggested. I think it's a bit more easy to do than what you are saying. I don't know, that is not the future. Perhaps it would be, but it will need other breakthrough in order to not only propose a mediation by an AI, but also convince people to accept the result of the mediation, because it is the most important part of a mediation, of arbitration, is that all the parts have to agree to it. And I don't think that for the moment it is really ready.
Thank you very much. So a lot of interesting questions. Yeah. Oh, sorry. More.
I just wanted to add like one small technical thought. If you think of the chatbot of something like very critical, like your bank, for example, it's a very dumb chatbot because there are a lot of rules what it can and cannot say. And I think for now, most of these like interactive systems that we see in like very sensitive areas, they're heavily controlled. And applications like ChatGPT are much less. And I think that's a bit, models that are very flexible are typically very conversational and very good, but we don't know exactly. I mean, even heavily censored GPT-4, you can still get it to say things that you wouldn't want to get it and to say in these contexts. I think from like a technical viewpoint, I'm not sure we're there. And I think very generally to ask the question, how can you persuade someone? It's extremely hard. So in political science and social sciences more generally, there's a huge literature, just like simple things like small political messages. How do you actually get people, for a party to like pick up the message that they want to? And it's a very, very mixed literature. So I think we're very advanced in so many ways, but to like really understand how we can persuade human beings, I'm not sure we know as much as we sometimes think we do.
Roland, you wanted to add something as well? Okay. So this time, no, that's very interesting. And actually, yes, this really shows how, the interest in this discussion. And thank you very much for all your questions. This very fruitful dialogue here that it's panning out. So,
may
I'd
I
like to move on in our discussion. And to sum it up, we said that there's been a lot of promises here, but also a lot of expectations. And at some point, it's also about saying, but is it something new? Is this a new discussion that is happening? Because we could say that in social sciences, for example, they've been decades since researchers have been using like large data sets to try to measure, the causes of war, or it comes about measuring violence. This is not a new thing, but what's new now, and this is why we're here today, is this alignment between different circles. There are new tools that were not there before. There's no access to data. In terms of that data generation, now there is so much more possibilities. Data is everywhere, and it's easier to collect. It's also easier to have access to some tools from people also outside of the university, because for very long at university, it was the specialized job. So in social sciences, for example, you had the special person who was in charge of doing the analysis. And more now, we have this more open access to data analysis, to the use of AI. There is also an alignment with the diplomatic circles, with this need for new tools, with this demand. There is also coming from philanthropy, from foundations, this need and this understanding that now maybe this promise can be finally delivered, about what science can do and help in terms of what we're talking today here, diplomacy, but in a broader sense, global governance. So now to move on in the discussion and to interrogate our speakers, again, each of them on this issue of computational diplomacy. I would like maybe to stop talking about boxes. It's my fault. I started with boxes. No more boxes. Because the problem of boxes, then we talk about silos, then we need to break them, and then we talk about bridges between the silos. And the problem with bridges is that we put a lot of pressure on bridges, because a bridge is not enough. You can cut a bridge, you cannot let somebody pass the bridge, you can put a toll on the bridge. So the image of the bridge is not that good. It's an easy way out. But we still need to differentiate here the different actors, because it's important. And from now on, instead of boxes, I suggest to talk about roles, because it's a discussion and people have different roles. Because at some point, when you all talk about bridges and breaking silos, everybody can do everything, and that's also a problem. Because we're here. This session was initiated by 2 universities, so it's also about what's the role of the university in this discussion. What's the role of diplomacy in terms of expectations? And because when we talk about roles, we also talk about responsibility. We talk also about obligations, etc., etc. So now let's all play roles and not be in boxes. And if you're okay with it, we'll start again, asking all of you about that, because and we'll start let's start with university again, where even within the university we have these different roles, different expectations, different obligations between disciplines, for example. So let's start with you, Didier.
So I think, it's a quite important topic, because we need to train people that are able to work with these tools. And there is a gap in the social science and humanities regarding the use of data science and AI. But when I take the other way, I look at the problem the other way around. I see a lot of people train in these methods, but they also need to understand better the global governance, the international system. So we have this whole divide between the natural and the social science, and I think it's becoming very urgent that we try to reduce this divide, because obviously it cannot be deleted like this. And so the Seed Lab, what we do is to address this divide, because we are a joint venture between Social Science Global Studies Institute and the Department of Computer Science, which is based at the Faculty of Science. And this is where we need innovation in terms of program, be it at the bachelor, the master, and the doctorate level. And I can mention the example of the doctorate level, because in the Global Studies Institute, we created the interdisciplinary PhD. For some people, this kind of thing would say, oh, no, that doesn't make sense. A PhD has to be disciplinary. And then having this kind of institutional change, it takes a lot of time. I can tell you a lot of resistance too from some people. Can also help training people that really try to work at the interface between the computational science, let's say, and international relation, and make contribution to the kind of approaches that we want to make.
Thank you very much. So, and how does that work on the ETH side in Zurich? ETH is the biggest university. I mean, the highest ranked university in Switzerland. How does this issue this discussion takes place.
So from my personal perspective, ETH is the perfect place to do computational social science because as a social scientist, you're heavily exposed to the natural sciences because, I mean, it's a federal polytechnical institute after all. So I think it's actually the perfect place. And we also see it in my lab, for example, it's very interdisciplinary and I generally speaking enjoy it. I think from like a research perspective and from like an incentive point of view, since I mean, publications, they are very, very important in research, as you all know. And I think many outlets, they still favor, they're really like this specific. So I think there's a little bit of a cost also to interdisciplinarity from a pure research point of view. I think that's a bit of a problem, but I think generally speaking, I've really made great experience with this like interdisciplinary setting. Another thing about the roles where I see a lot of potential for scientists in general to expand. So I think when we talk about like data science, many people think of like analyzing the data. But if you go to like a data science class, the first thing you learn is that data science is more of a pipeline. So there's a lot of logistics happening before you actually analyze the data. And I think the discussion, it often centers around, and I think academia in particular is fascinated with new methods and new results, but very few people ask this question about like, how do we get to the point where we have the data sets that are integrated such that we can do the analysis that we want? How can we support the relevant actors to actually collect this data in the first place? Or also talking about biases, we often have like entire battery of methods to use, but they're all trained on the same data set. I think here I also see a bit of a misalignment in incentives because data contributions from a publication point of view, again, are not very attractive in many scientific fields. So I feel like to really make data science useful, data science for social good, we have to put much more emphasis on this entire pipeline instead of just like hyping individual methods that have very good results in solving a particular problem.
Thank you. And so specifically on this issue then on how to make it more interesting, but also how to deliver in this, you know, from the university perspective in this, because there's been this, and technologies and artificial intelligence in particular is all, you know, the idea of when there is a hype, there is also a lot of people threatening to do things. Oh, we have to do this. Oh, we will do this, we promise. So how to deliver from the university perspective when it comes to the role of the university to finally make that happen, make that, so not bridge, but I think the image of filling a gap is more relevant here. And I think, Jean-Luc, you have you have an example at the University of, at the SID lab for that at the University of Geneva specifically.
Yes. So some concrete, so this exact problem is not only a problem of diplomacy and computational science or social science, computational science is really across all scientific domains. All scientific domains, they really need computer methods, computing algorithm, computational science. But on the other hand, they need a really deep knowledge of the discipline. And to try to fill this gap, in University of Geneva, we're starting next week a new bachelor called Bachelor in Computational Science. And the idea is that since day one, the students, they will choose one specific direction. So for this year, they have the choice between life science and earth and environmental science. And they will do a kind of dual bachelor with half of the effort in computational science, methodology, mathematics, modeling science, and half in the domain that they chosen. And the lecture that were chosen such as to allow them to then go either in a bachelor and a master in computer science or life science. So we try to do the opposite of what people usually do. Instead of taking students with a bachelor and a master and again providing them with additional training, we try to start from the base to have some kind of dual profile really from the start, and then let them specialize in one or the other domain. It's a bit of the reverse. And concerning computational diplomacy in particular, we also have the same program that should start next year with global studies and computational science half and half, but focusing on the really important core and the foundation in order to have these students that are comfortable with both dimensions from the start.
Thank you very much. So we've been here hearing about different examples in university in Switzerland. So before maybe we broaden the scope here of the gaps that need to be filled or to be or the roles that need to be addressed, maybe just one last thing about universities outside of Switzerland. Like Roland, you had different experiences. You were in Canada before and before in Singapore. How does this same discussion about what we could, let's say, how this issue of interdisciplinarity in the framework of computational diplomacy, its needs and its promises, how does that discussion takes place in your previous institutions?
So first, like a disclaimer, it's a personal perspective based on my own experience. So I've been very fortunate to spend 10 years in East Asia in academia and 5 years in North America, both in the US and Canada. Before coming to Switzerland. And there are things that are truly like issues that are truly global, like that I think are institutional. On the one hand, universities are places where the innovation, appears, but at the same time, they are extremely rigid. The University of Geneva is extremely old. It's creating something fantastic with the Seed Lab, with ETH at the same time, but in some places, you have rules at the institutional level in terms of what degree you can deliver that are making things very difficult. Right? In the old days, we all know the history of most of the universities. They have been built piece by piece, department by department. And when we talk about breaking down silos, it's still difficult. In East Asia, and I was in Singapore, it's fantastic to see how quickly they can change things and modify the structure of the university. Not to say that everything is great there, but I've been really impressed by their agility in terms of revamping those institutions in terms of being truly interdisciplinary. Just to give like a very interesting example, in my previous institution, we had no departments, and all of us, like from all departments, were like in the same in different buildings, but I had the chance to have like casual interactions with colleagues in the social sciences that led me to work in social sciences. It's as simple as that, right? The coffee maker kind of discussion, and it happened there. And in North America, it was like the complete opposite in a sense. Very like the buildings are, we have those huge campuses, and it's very hard to have interactions unless you really know the people. And again, it's a personal perspective. So this is why, what the University of Geneva with ETH and Zurich are doing is fantastic, because it's really breaking down those silos and trying to bring people together, and also like hopefully, having degrees that are, relevant to the society.
Thank you very much, Roland. Now, so let's move to another role. So I'd like to ask you, Andre, from your perspective, how would you see this idea of bridging, bridging gaps, of filling gaps, I mean, when it comes to, for example, because you have a question about this in the chat, about the potential inequalities when it comes to the uses of AI between different countries. So how, but also more generally when it comes to having different people on board, having different kind of actors. How do you see your role in this broader conversation?
Yes, it's a very difficult. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we hear you.
I thought you couldn't. No, it's a very expansive, very difficult question. Let me just tackle a couple of points, if I may. I still see my role as somewhat of a bridging role, in the sense that a lot of what I'm concerned with in my role is really bridging the gap between the traditional diplomatic corps that's focused purely on international relations or the multilateral system or specific countries and so on, and the digital world, the technology world, because the rules are different, the actors are different, and it's important to understand the tech. And very often the nuances of the tech, the ideas, the difference between hype and reality, that's very hard for any one traditional diplomat to grasp across the board. So my role is really a bridging role between understanding the tech and digesting it to forward it to the government or the diplomatic corps in order to take the decisions that they need to take. And not just in the abstract, someone mentioned lethal autonomous weapon systems. That's one example as well, where we want to understand better what our national standpoint should be and what our pronouncements on that should be. But also bringing this question in now about how we can use specific bits and pieces of tech to engage better with other countries. So my role is to try and identify these, and at the risk of sounding like someone in an ivory tower, kind of digesting the information and passing it on to the rest of the diplomatic corps. Now, the question actually calls for specific examples. It's hard to give a very concrete way of how we can use the diplomacy as a way to bridge the gap between excuse me, what is the word that's used? Asymmetries in AI access in different countries. But in our diplomatic activities, or our international relations as countries, we have access. We can bring people around a table. Now, in the case of AI, for example, what the Commonwealth is doing, and we're assisting in this, is to bring around the table the providers of the tech. NVIDIA, for example, is involved at a very high level in this initiative. We're bringing around the table countries that have the computational capacity and the human capacity to be able to run models, develop models, teach, etc., and bring them around the same literal table, the same physical table, with countries that don't yet have this capacity but want to investigate it. And that's it. You just bring people around the table and understand what kind of programs you need to do, what kind of access, either physical or to computational systems you need to do. So it's very hard to give one answer to this, but there are ways in which we can use diplomatic efforts to start chipping away at this problem and start balancing this asymmetry, as the commenter so well asked.
Very much, because there's a follow-up question that definitely fits here. It's about how do you bring power in terms of this use of AI that now it's more and more present in diplomatic fields, but the question is quite broad. But I'm asking it this way, since you were talking about, well, with regard to what we're talking right now. How do you see the next years when it comes to that? Would AI be here more to level up the field, or some actors will basically take advantage of others, and that won't change anything? How do you see, what's the role in AI in power politics? Basically, it's a broad question, but since we have you here, I think it would be interesting to hear it, and then to extend the question also to the rest of the panel. But
if I may just kind of, then it is a very broad question and an enormously difficult one. So I'm just going to try and say something, hopefully to answer it. I don't know if it's going to balance or reinforce the existing structures. I don't think it's going to do either. I think it's going to change things dramatically. So the reality is, and I was hearing, there was a discussion yesterday at the Digital Diplomacy Network of the EU member states, and someone there made a very interesting point. The world has never seen trillion-dollar companies with a war chest. They can invest $20 billion, 20 billion euros every year in developing new technologies. And very few countries can actually outmaneuver them. So in some sense, I think it's not going to balance or imbalance. It's going to give us a new actor with a completely, from a different point of view. It's not a big state or a small state. It's not part of the traditional discussion. But these actors will have strength beyond that of nation states. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion from the power perspective. Of course, from the point of view of using AI simply as a tool, it will help level some imbalances because small nations, Malta, have very small resources. Even our diplomatic corps is tiny. Having any access to something that can translate, do machine translation for some documents, that makes us more efficient, that allows us to tackle more problems at the same time. So in that restricted sense, as a tool, I firmly believe it will start leveling. But broadly speaking, you know, the power that AI in general has, I think it's neither imbalancing more nor rebalancing. It's going to bring a new actor on board, and we're seeing this in other aspects as well, you know, with internet governance and so on. It's going to be interesting to try and see how the global power system is going to absorb this new actor and how we're going to start relating to it. That's the best answer I can give in a couple of minutes.
Very much, considering the time that you had, that you managed already to say a lot on such a difficult question. Thank you very much. Now let's move to Maricela and the role of JESDA in this, you know, orchestration of this discussion that's about computational diplomacy and AI that's really had a lot of stakeholders. How would you define your role in that sense?
Well, I think it's a multi-role, and I think we all play different roles, even in our current capacities. But I think that we start by working together. That's it, hands-on. And although we depart from the science and we have this radar that I mentioned before that look at the scientific breakthroughs in 5, 10, and even 25 years, so it's really forward-looking. We come together, all the communities in our organization, namely the academics, the diplomats, the scientists, the citizens, the impact investors, the private sector, and we try to look at these breakthroughs as opportunities, not as problems. So it's less constrained, the approach, I would say. And from there, we brainstorm about potential solution ideas and initiatives that could play a role in accelerating not only the dialogue among the different stakeholders, but also the development of solutions that will tackle the Sustainable Development Goals. Because we all know that the technology is dual-use nature. So I'm not talking only about computational diplomacy and AI, but broadly, all the emerging technologies. And how you can make sure that you can spot the opportunities to develop use cases using these capacities, but also what you anticipate will be the future capacity of these technologies, and of course try to mitigate the risk. So in this methodology that we use, we curate task forces, and it's very interesting because the first time that we did it because we're a very young organization. You know, we place together scientists and academics talking about science and diplomacy or quantum computing. And we were like, oh my God, you know, let's see how this goes. But, you know, funny enough, but also inspiring enough was the fact that they really appreciated the space, the platform that we provided for them to interact and speak freely without national positions, without particular interests at the top of their agendas to develop initiatives. And, you know, just, I know we're standing between lunch and your talk, but I think that when you develop initiatives and you collaborate and you try them out, then you really bridge these gaps. We have, as I mentioned, the Open Quantum Institute, which is an example of these collaborations. And next year, we will be incubating a global curriculum on science and diplomacy with different offerings, also to make sure that we have the skills to pace with these technological advancements for global governance and for the achievement of a better future for all. And finally, inclusivity is very important because it's not only about disciplines and sectors, but also geographies. And this is not, you know, a secret. These conversations are much more advanced in Europe, in the US perhaps, and a lot less discussed in developing economies. So we need to level the playing field. And that's also something that is very important, to build bridges between science and diplomacy and making sure that we can validate the tools that you are developing.
Thank you very much. And just to follow up on that, we have a question basically about the governance of computational diplomacy, about, you know, having all these actors together, but also how this new tools, this new discussion, this new space can have an influence on diplomacy itself and the way it will play out in the field, in the sense that would citizens be more implicated, for example, in conflict resolution or in diplomatic dialogue, and would have this an impact even on relationship between countries? And I think that's an interesting question, because it also interrogates here all the roles here, the role of university, like all this data and this knowledge. Does it have to be generated by scientists or by the public sector? What's the role of private sector in the data generation? All these questions actually they relate to that one. So that's thank you for asking this question. And so how would you? We don't have time to have all the answers here, but is one or two of you? How do you see the role of these new tools of computational diplomacy in general in the practice of diplomacy itself, in terms of diplomacy being more inclusive, less some states, powerful state-centered, to put it quickly here. So how would you see that? Does somebody want to? And then we have a question here. So what's Didier?
I think there are, of course, different responses level also, but one thing that I see by putting all the data to the broader public diplomatic communities is that we can see the position of states in different fora, because states have different interests, and sometimes they say something in agriculture.
Tu m'entends?
And they say quite the contrary in
du coup, je
sectors.
parle pas dans la séance parce que comme je suis le séminaire en même temps, je crois que tu me coupes.
Okay, so there is this topic of policy coherency, and while discussing with diplomats, it seems that already some states check what the other position are in different arenas and say, okay, you said this in this forum, and now you say this. What's your real position on that? Because it's clearly related. And the nature of the challenge that we face is really about addressing a number of issues across sectors. If you think about emerging infectious disease like the pandemic, there are a number of sectors that are involved. There need to be discussion with the environment, food system, animal health, human health. So having the data, seeing what are the different positions in different forums can also help to bring a bit of coherency, to be able to check what government are doing. So this is one way I see the implication of this data science.
If you can very quickly address that,
two
because I have
fingers
one last question.
Only, I think that the question regarding the involvement of citizens is really, really relevant. Just that we have what we call the pulse of society. So that's also included in the radar. With artificial intelligence, we monitor what is important for citizens and how can they better engage. And the aim is to develop soon a sounding board so that we can structure these conversations. And also we have interactive dialogues with youth monthly with one of our board members in South Africa. So I think that this is a two-way street, and we really need to make sure that citizens can also use their agency to validate these conversations, but to get their inputs is really, really relevant. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We had a question here, and this will be our last question.
I have a question. Take the Powell's talk before the United Nations at the start of the war with Iraq. Okay? In what sense you would see the possibility that the AI would have changed the outcome or shown to the ministers and so on in the United Nations that most of these things were fake?
That's a great question. Thank you very much. Who wants to address it? Yes, Irene?
I can give you a perspective from the media. There's actually super exciting research that shows that sometimes when voters are in experimental, but also like field experimental setting, when they're shown some information, and then after they're even told that this information was fake, they do update a bit their opinion, but actually not completely so. So relative to groups who saw like the real information, it doesn't always help. So I think if you think of artificial intelligence as providing truth alone, we're dealing with humans. We said it in many times. Also, we also deal with humans with like voters. So I feel like this whole emotional component, it's very important in this field, I think. And I'm not sure that artificial intelligence would be more effective at addressing it at this point.
These are the limits of the...
Yes. Thank you very much. So it's already past time. It's been an extremely interesting session. So if there is one, we don't have time to sum it up or to do a last tour de table. Sorry about that, but just to sum it up and maybe to leave you with one takeaway is that we're not here to have this discussion again about the promises of AI in the diplomatic world. This is going to happen, and to promise it, we're saying it's a long way, and this way, and it takes building, and this is our main takeaway, building up a space where all the actors in that space know the role, put resources to play that role, and unless we don't have this conversation going on and this space building up with the right research, the right teaching, the right bachelor, master's, PhD program, but also with the right funding, the right implication of public and private actors. If we don't have that space building up, all will never deliver this promises. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your questions here and online. I think it's been a very interesting session. Thank you very much to our panelists being here and online. Thank you very much, Andre, for joining. It's been a very good session. Thank you very much, and thank you to our organizers.